Hello.
Detective, we need you.
Sorry, Chief. I'm retired.
I know, but we've got a huge case we need to crack, and damn it if you weren't the best detective this force has ever seen.
Uh-huh. And what part of retirement don't you understand, Chief? Surely somebody else can. Uh-huh. Yeah. Alright, Chief. You know I hate to see a grown man grovel. I'll help you out. Just make sure to clear out my old office, will ya? My old stomping grounds. Well, I guess I better get started, cause, like it or not, I'm back, baby. Apparently, the boys down at the agency had one hell of a case on their hands. You see, VR, while technically still growing, seems to be stagnating both in terms of sales and the overall mood of the community at large. So the chief wants me to look into VR here in 26 and figure out what is stopping it from obtaining mainstream adoption. So as always, I find it imperative that we take a look at the cold, hard facts. VR as a whole has definitely grown since we last looked at this case back in 23, with 24 seeing an additional 9.6 million headsets entering the marketplace and 25 estimated to have added another 6.6 million for a total of roughly 16 million new headsets pouring in during this time period. But while on the surface this seems to be a positive, as always, I knew I had to go deeper. I had to look for the data within the data to establish the real problems and true outlook of the medium. VR has certainly been declining over the past few years, and whether we like to admit it or not, this is a concerning development. And don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, the here and now is the absolute best time in the history of the technology to be a VR gamer. With several headsets available for consumers from a variety of different companies, with options for PC or standalone play available for VR goers to choose from, and not to mention the number of quality made for VR games has continued to rise during this period as well. But still, we can't ignore the fact that for all the good that seems to be permeating throughout the space, there exist major signs that this may be the make or break year for VR's short to midterm future. And honestly, this can be most clearly seen with Meta, the current leader in the VR space, whom have been hemorrhaging money on R&D for years now, to the tune of over $70 billion in cumulative losses since late 20. Now, passion project or not for the much maligned Mark Zuckerberg, this is an absolutely astronomical figure that has left company shareholders bullish on the mega conglomerate as of late, and has led to Meta finally making the decision to make major cuts in funding for the Reality Labs division, as well as the very recent closures of Twisted Pixel, Armature, and Sansaro Games, three Meta-owned studios responsible for major VR titles over the last few years. Now, word around the precinct is that this is just a big pivot towards wearables and AI technology, spearheaded by Meta's successful Ray-Ban collaboration, but I knew that these cuts had to go deeper. Headlined by 24's Batman Arkham Shadow, Deadpool VR, and the long-awaited Asgard's Wrath 2 Meta-owned studios have actually been putting together a decent run of games, and according to the often maligned Meta CTO Andrew Bosworth, they are still investing massively into VR gaming and don't plan to stop. However, there seems to be more of a focus on supporting third-party studios as opposed to producing first-party games themselves, and we have an official statement courtesy of Oculus Studios director Tamaro Sikamana, who stated that with this change we are shifting our investments to focus on our third-party developers and partners to ensure long-term sustainability. Now, this is a sentiment that has seemingly been echoed by Sony, as they have continued to quietly allow third-party studios to bolster their library of games with releases like Thief VR, Rager, the Resident Evil 4 remake, and Hitman World of Assassination, all gracing the headset in the last 18 months. Which to me indicates that solely relying on third-party developers is the way that the whole doggone industry is going. which could be a net positive, as I believe that if you let people who are truly passionate about VR simply be their best creative selves, that the overall quality of the games will eventually be much, much higher. Now, we also have to throw into the mix that the recently confirmed Steam frame is destined to shake up the space at large, and new headsets are coming in from both Samsung and ByteDance, and at first glance it's easy to think that all things VR are moving full steam ahead. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here. The fact of the matter is that once the final holiday figures for 25 are released, it is expected that VR's global headset sales will decline for a third straight year, with 23 and 24 seeing a 24 and 12% decline year over year respectively. And an industry-wide freefall at this point feels imminent. I was stumped. I couldn't seem to make the pieces of this precarious puzzle fit together. What is the disconnect? Is VR just a passing fad, or is this just a rough patch in its formative era? Could VR really be dead this time? I had just about given up hope on finding a solution for the night before something unexpected hit me. What is at the core of any console's popularity? What drives gamers to hop on and play that extra round or spend those extra dollars? The games. A wise man once told me that when all else fails, get back to the basics. And with a case of this magnitude, I knew that that was exactly what needed to be done. As at the core of VR gaming is, of course,
legs.
Legs!
The games. And to say that the space has been spoiled for choice the last couple of years would be an absolute understatement, as in just 25 alone, players were graced with Arcane Age, Memoriam, Deadpool VR, Demio Dungeons & Dragons, and of course RoboQuest, my personal favorite. Now, these are all titles that scored well with both players and critics alike, but peering a little bit closer, I think I may have found our first major point of contention that is seemingly hindering VR's forward progression: optimization. You see, because for every polished day one release that is presented to the VR community, there are 10 horribly done ones that absolutely decimate any chance of making a good first impression, thus driving down the player review scores and turning off potential players from checking said title out. Think of titles like Reach or Alien Rogue Incursion. These were massively hyped games in the VR space that were marred by launch woes that were not only frustrating, but absolutely game-breaking at times as well. I'm talking invisible walls that hinder forward progression, frequent game crashes, and in some instances, games that simply wouldn't launch. And while this isn't an issue that is exclusive to VR by any means, it must be noted that when the player base is significantly smaller like it is absolutely imperative that those first impressions are strong. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with as many variables as you are with PC VR or VR in general, this isn't always able to happen, thus stressing the core infrastructure of VR even further. And that's before we even talk about that you have to deal with that pesky motion sickness that a lot of VR newcomers are experiencing and are susceptible to, and having a game that isn't optimized well or stutters a lot only compounds the issue, thus alienating a larger and larger percentage of the potential new player base. And here in 26, we were hoping that somehow this would be an issue that kind of just magically went away, when the fact of the reality is that we're not just seeing companies try to push a new gaming console, this is a completely new platform and medium altogether, and the motion sickness issue probably still ranks among the highest reasons for the lack of new players and the general stagnation in the space. But while on the topic of games, it has to be noted that while 24 and 25 provided a nice influx of games, that doesn't necessarily mean that these games were profitable or more imperative to the gamer. It doesn't mean that these games will be quickly followed up with more new games. For an example, let's take a look at Pistol Whip developer Cloudhead Games, who has recently announced that they are laying off 70% of their staff. Now, by all accounts, Pistol Whip was a massive success for the studio, taking in millions of dollars and putting out a ton of content with high replay value. But the years and years of investing funds into their quote stealth projects have bled the company dry, and according to CEO Denny Unger, this in tandem with industry forces beyond their control has led to the laying off of 40 staff members. As with VR gaming just hitting its adolescent stage, there is still a need to truly flesh out the library of games available to players. Whereas traditional flat gaming mega studios like Rockstar have the luxury of coasting on yearly online profits thanks to a large and dedicated player base that itself almost doubles the most generous estimations of monthly VR players. And as far as gamers are concerned, yes, the wait and constant delays of the long-awaited GTA 6 are frustrating, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of objectively good games that have been constantly released for flat gamers during this time period. And this alleviates this frustration, a luxury that VR unfortunately does not have at the moment, creating a weird perception even with some VR veterans that VR has no games. I knew now that I was close to cracking this case wide open. But still, I knew that there had to be one final clue to solve the riddle that is determining what VR looks like today and projects to be moving forward. Drained from working the case, I laid down to catch a few winks with nothing but the faint light of a candle and the sound of a radio in the distance. Blackness all around had almost consumed me, and I had just about drifted off to sleep when suddenly that stupid Pepsi Cola ad started playing. God, I hate that ad. That stupid ad just kept playing in my head over and over and over and over. And then the darndest thing happened. I could go for a Pepsi Cola. The marketing. It's the marketing. I raced back to the office as I had finally found the missing link. Because the fact of the matter is that VR is inherently a different beast in terms of marketing, as it is truly difficult to visualize the full experience of a VR title via a commercial or a traditional online ad. Because again, we're not just seeing a new console being presented, but an altogether entirely new medium. One that has its own limitations, like lack of space and the aforementioned motion sickness woes that some users may experience. And this is the primary area that stands as the major point of concern for VR's short to mid-term success. VR needs to be marketed better. And how these VR companies have been going about these things, in my own opinion, hasn't been cutting the mustard, as Meta and Sony have gone the traditional route of using television and online ads to showcase certain games, hardware, and accessories. But this doesn't just quite do these experiences justice, as showcasing these games without being able to highlight the sense of scale and immersion present is not ideal. Now, couple this with the cold truth that VR gaming isn't very profitable at the moment, and most of the usual suspects sans Valve seem to be significantly reducing spending surrounding all things VR, and the harsh reality of things is that the money simply isn't there. But as always, you have to account for those unaccountable variables. And with that, enter the Steam frame, which in my estimation has the potential to completely change things, as Valve aims to bridge the gap between standalone and PC VR players with its sleek new headset set to release sometime later this year. And to me, the success of this particular headset may indicate the direction of the industry as a whole. Because if Valve can't make it happen, then quite frankly, no one can. The Steam frame stands as an opportunity for VR to take that next step in obtaining mainstream adoptions, with gamers being able to access their entire PC VR and flat PC libraries. This may be the headset that starts a real conversation of the masses towards VR, but this is very much price dependent. Because as I'm sure we all know, times are tough for many folks out there, and VR most certainly isn't the most inexpensive hobby to have, so the proper price point for the Steam frame is of the utmost importance to capitalize on all this opportunity. I knew I had all the pieces, I just needed to solve this case, and now it was simply just time to make my final report. What is the current state of VR here in 26? What does the market look like moving forward? And are the claims of VR being dead more bluster or an actual reality that could really happen? Let me lay it all out for you. VR is admittedly and obviously at an impasse. Many smaller studios are experiencing layoffs or outright closures altogether, and the larger investors outside of Valve seem to be scaling back their own interests in the space. Now, while both 24 and 25 provided us with excellent releases, it is imperative that 26 does even more on the software front. This appears to be a bit of a race against the clock, as the money is certainly drying up, and those who still have investors need to produce high quality, optimized at launch titles to promote positive word of mouth. The barrier of entry still exists within the VR space, as some individuals are space limited, physically limited, or experience either motion sickness or general VR fatigue. And until the technology advances a bit, this is just a harsh reality that will have to be dealt with. Now, the marketing aspect is probably the toughest one to nail, as traditional ads don't seem to work for the medium, and the solution to this may be the implementation of more test units in stores like the good old days. Sure, GameStop is down, but both Walmart and Best Buy are not. I believe that the investment into putting testable units into these storefronts will both encourage individuals who are on the fence about buying a headset to make the jump, and allow for potential new players to work through their initial motion sickness problems prior to making a purchase. This is the only way to truly show people the immersive elements that VR brings to the table, and will undoubtedly allow a much larger pool of people to see VR up close and personal. Bring VR to the people, because VR as of right now could go either way. With a ton of uncertainty surrounding the potential success or failure of the Steam frame, the shift from Meta to the ongoing AI takeover and their shifting of resources, and of course the lengthy wait times for a handful of top-tier games, make for a precarious yet manageable VR environment at the moment. And while that may not be what you all want to hear, but at this point in time, it appears that VR's continued success will be in the hands of a small group of talented creatives who will be tasked with carrying the space on their collective backs until it makes more financial sense for larger investors to get involved. And truthfully, this may be for the best, as this way allows VR to organically develop into the best version of itself. And the fact of the matter is, VR gaming may be in for a bit of an extended dry spell, and this year is pivotal in its future success, so all eyes will be on Valve and the field's indie studios to deliver, because if they don't, it's gonna be a cold VR winter. Case closed.